As of today, we are in week 7 of social distancing, and for our educational people to be working at home. Obviously, our clinical faculty are over at the hospital, and as Jean said, many of our faculty are doing areas of medicine that they haven't ever done for the last couple of decades. People are being pulled into primary care and COVID care who have been surgeons, dermatologists, ophthalmologists, and that's totally appropriate. Next slide, please. Just to give you the time frame, and this is I'm waiting for the next slide. Corey?
Is it not there? It's
not on mine. Does anybody else see the next slide?
Yeah.
No,
There you go.
now it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So this is kind of like the time frame. We're actually at May 1st in the middle of the slide, but we'll back up a little bit to March just to give you a sense of what has happened here over the last 6 weeks or so. In March, it became really clear from keeping track with our Italian colleagues that the medical school took this very, very seriously. We have lots of friends who were telling us that if we didn't prepare for this very quickly, we would be way over our capacity. So the hospital immediately started gearing up, and the medical school started teaching the education faculty new skills on Zoom. Note, I never played with this program before, but now we're all really good at it. And we did it at a time when our IT people could actually teach in person, which was really good because it's not that easy to get started with. And meanwhile, the clinical people were ramping up, and we were making plans for ramping down research because we want to protect our research faculty as well. And we knew that we were going to be needing to basically ramp down on the animal experimentations and that sort of thing, and to be finishing up experiments that couldn't be mothballed, and to store everything, all the supplies away so that our people would eventually be able to stay home. So probably the planning phase took about a 3-week period. I don't think I could have gotten the faculty to do this in more than a year if we had just done it under normal circumstances, but a burning platform actually does incentivize people in ways that general academia does not normally do. So next slide. We don't have it yet. So we had this massive transition and planning for virtual classrooms and essential and COVID research only. A lot of our faculty immediately pivoted, and whatever they were doing saw what kind of things they could actually do for COVID. The IT and facilities people were key. Immediately we increased the amount of cleaning that they were doing. It was almost impossible because they would have to clean 3 or 4 times a day, and in the past they didn't have to do that, doorknobs and everything. And then as people started to leave, that became, we closed off buildings piecemeal, floors at a time, so that the facilities people could concentrate only on the floors where people were left. We left study spaces open for the students in the instructional building on the 1st floor and the 11th floor. That's the testing center where they could really spread out and leave 10 seats between the students, because the students in the student residence would would have cabin fever after a while, and they would need to walk over and go to the library. We taught the students how to do video teaching from home, and we left one auditorium, a small auditoria, open so that they could teach from in person from that auditorium, particularly for the clinicians, because they could walk over when they were seeing patients, after they saw patients, come over and teach from the medical school and then walk back to their clinical rotations. We did get permission from the city to continue one construction. because we were in the midst of putting in a new MRI. I think the city kind of thought that maybe we would need that MRI for clinical, and maybe we will. So they actually allowed us to continue the construction around the research imaging center that includes a 3.5 Tesla research computer MRI for our faculty, and about a 7 Tesla animal MRI for doing research studies on animals. And both of those are ongoing and continuing. You're only allowed to have 2 construction people at a time in the space, and they have to be 6 feet apart and all that sort of thing. But they're literally continuing to put this imaging center in place, and we should have it in by May. And then eventually, after about a 1.5 week period of ramping down, we were on, all buildings were on card access, which means that the faculty, staff, and students can get in, but they need IDs. We can still get supplies delivered by delivery people, but they have to have an ID card as well. Next slide. Maybe as I'm talking, as I'm getting down, you can put up the next slide a little bit ahead of time, since there seems to be a significant delay. Just some of the stories that have come out of our transition. We got coronavirus fairly reasonably early. I think we're the only ones in Boston that have it, therefore everybody else is collaborating with us. This is Rob Davey, who is all suited up. They're treating COVID, we'll call it C19, as a BL4, because if they did it in the BL3 lab, they would need N95 labs. Our faculty and the clinics need our N95 labs, and they figured they had the level 4 equipment sitting around, and I think the faculty felt more comfortable in level 4 anyway. They were all trained up, and they didn't want to get COVID either. So they decided to do all the COVID research at level 4, which protected them better and saved the N95 masks for our clinical colleagues. So they started immediately screening COVID-19 against all compounds that are already available pharmaceutically, looking specifically in collaborations with some Harvard people for compounds that actually look like they would fit into the molecular structure of COVID-19 specifically. So the Harvard people had identified some compounds that would be high likely to be active, and they would then screen the others as well. So that's a screening capacity. They're also doing vaccination research, and you'll hear much more about that from Ron Corley, the director of the Needle, in one of the next talks. Next slide. And see if you can stay ahead of me a little bit. Kevin Wilson is one of our professors of pulmonary and allergy, and he was chosen to actually serve on the NIH treatment guidelines expert panel nationally. So we have representation of our senior faculty on treatment and screening guidelines, and that will be a committee that will continue to meet as randomized trials get announced. That committee will meet on Zoom. And we'll make changes to the treatment guidelines so that they're just right up to date. Some of you saw a randomized trial that was released like this week. So it's great that his expertise was also recognized. Next slide. We ended up having real problems with testing like everybody else. Our CREM group, actually the group that works on tissue organelles and that sort of thing, basically stood up a test for coronavirus and got it FDA approved so that we could actually get it, since we couldn't seem to get it from the CDC or anybody else. And we desperately needed testing at Boston Medical Center for both our faculty and our patients. And so you'll see some of the people here starting to work on the test. These people, all the laboratory people donated all their RNA tests. And so they stacked up the kits, and we buried the test and started testing here. That got ramped down again once the major industry testers were now available, but we had to do that for a while. Next slide. This is the team appropriately spaced. It was both the crim team and the pathology team because we needed the pathology people to be doing the actual testing and the crim to be to get the tests stood up and done. It's interesting now, even 2 or 3 weeks later, all the people are wearing masks at the school. And now looking at a picture without people wearing masks already looks a little unusual. Next slide. So that brings us to about the mid-March. At that point, we were planning match day, which the students had been really excited. They were going to have match day on the other campus, which is in a big space so that they could have their families, because we never, because of fire code, could never have their families and the students in Hebert at the same time. But that didn't happen, and we had to plan a virtual match for them. The students actually planned parts of this. Next slide, so that you can see some of the results of the match. You can see that internal medicine, as usual, was the major subspecialty: surgery, emergency medicine, pediatrics, in that order. I put the primary care ones in red. If you do the math, you'll see that 36% went into primary care, which means that next year on our primary care rankings, because they're basically based on how many students go into primary care, so we should go up a little bit on primary care because of those three. But you can see that we had a nice variation amongst the students in choice of specialty. Next slide. These are the places where they matched to. We're down to kind of twosies and onesies after that. They matched all over the country. We didn't have anybody in Hawaii, a couple in Canada, when some Canadians went back, which is fine. I put the 2 in red. BMC has 28 students. Boston Children's BMC is a joint program with Boston Children's. So we have about 31 of our students that will stay with us. And you can see where else they went, and they got into really good places. So I think that they were thrilled. Many of the students, most of the students were thrilled with where they matched this year, and sent in their pictures of them opening their envelopes with their families, and we put it all up on the web. You can see that 55 stayed in Massachusetts, 30 went to California. Many of them are from California, and then New York would be 3rd. So you just see the various numbers here. Next slide. The remarkable thing is that in addition to keeping up with their classes, we have 700 medical students. About 500 of them are involved in volunteer work. Many of them were providing child care for BUMC staff and faculty and the residents, because basically the child care disappeared, delivering meals, tracing COVID contacts. There's an army in Massachusetts doing that, calling patients for follow-up. Some of them volunteered for in-field hospitals and distributing meals. Pregnant women needed blood pressure cuffs and needed to be taught how to use them because they're not gonna be able to come in. And we have to make sure that we can manage their blood pressure. And they delivered PPE to homeless shelters. And they stood up a couple of new electives, one on disaster management. We have a master's degree on disaster management, so we pulled in the master's degree faculty and talked about how you set up field hospitals and things like that, and one on telemedicine, because a lot of the faculty are now doing telemedicine. That was another thing that just changed on a dime when Medicare realized they didn't want older at-risk people coming into hospitals, and literally switched it so that the reimbursement rate for telemedicine would be about that for a visit. And therefore, this is one where I don't think we're ever going to go back because the patients love it. If the doc's late, they basically just wait for the phone call. So I think the students are going to have to learn telemedicine because I think that that's going to be a bigger part of what they do. Kaiser, who has never had any financial disincentives to telemedicine, is using it for about 20% of their visits. Next slide. This is a magazine article that was on our students, and you could hear them describing it. You shouldn't have to be worrying about childcare if you're fighting a pandemic, and the students are on the front lines of healthcare for the homeless and BMC with their volunteer work. Next slide. So I think that they really wanted to step up and help. So then we're just getting to graduation. The governor, about a month before, and the secretary for Health and Human Services for Massachusetts asked the 4 deans to graduate their classes early so we could get them out seeing patients. And they put in place an emergency licensing mechanism so that would take less than a day for doctors to serve in Massachusetts. So we got permission from the university. That literally took a vote of the trustees, but they did it. And we graduated our class exactly 1 month early, made all the plans. Next slide, please. This is our student who was elected to give the valedictory address. Forrest Boyu. He's a peds neuro chop resident whenever he starts. Because Governor Baker had asked us to do this, he made a cameo appearance for graduation, as did the mayor, which we thought was really nice for the students, since this wasn't exactly what graduation normally was. And also, we looked over very carefully our student debt and made adjustments with operating dollars so that our graduating class graduated with no more debt than the class before, which graduated with less debt than the class before that. So we are bending the curve on student debt, and we literally have stability over the last 3 years where our students are actually graduating with less debt than 3 years ago. And we hope to continue this, but just wanted you to know that that was a real important thing when we were graduating this class, that we were watching that. Next slide. The one thing that about the virtual graduation that I think that was really done very nicely by our communications group, Maria Ober gets kudos here, is that they actually got the Hippocratic Oath. They recorded it from each of the students, and then electronically they made it so that it was synchronized, so that the ones who talked too fast got slowed down and the ones who talked too slow got speeded up a bit. And they actually got them to say the Hippocratic Oath together and in pieces. And it really, it was very moving, because, you know, they take the Hippocratic Oath when they do their white coat ceremony, and the faculty welcome them to the study of medicine. And now they had the opportunity to take the Hippocratic Oath, and the faculty welcomed them to the practice of medicine. And I see that Reshma had her hand up. Go ahead, a question or a comment?
Not at all, Karen, just applause on the reactions button for what a wonderful way to do it.
We didn't have a whole lot of choice. But I thought that the faculty and the communications people really stood it up. UMass went a couple of days before we did, and we noticed that their Hippocratic Oath was a little uneven, so we kind of fixed that. So I think everybody learned from everybody who went before. Interestingly, although all 4 deans initially told the governor we would do it, the three of the schools did and Harvard did not. It's just kind of interesting. Next slide, please. So thank you, and we managed to get past that. We will have our regular virtual graduation for our master's degree students, our PhDs, and our dual degrees, and 3 students that are MDs and in military medicine, and they lose their stipends as of the day they graduate. So they had their, and then they get commissioned, and so they get paid by the military immediately thereafter. And if we graduated them a month early, they would have lost their stipends. So we're graduating those 3 with the PhDs and the master students and the dual degree students, so that they don't lose out on their stipend. And the military didn't care because they weren't going to pick them up early anyway. So we're planning that with everything that we learned from graduation for the MDs that we'll be able to deploy for graduation for our PhDs and master's students. So any questions on that? If you put up your hand, I can only see 1/3 of you at a time on my computer, so I can't tell if you put up your verbal hand, but just unmute yourself and call out if you have a question or a comment so far, or advice.
You can also enter your question in chat and I'll monitor those.
Great. I see Dick put his hands up, and then David and Rod. So let's do them in that order.
Yep. Is it Rick Catronbone going
Oh,
first?
we have a couple. We have Catro. Yeah, why don't you start, and then Dick Shipley if he wants.
Okay, so you graduated the students exactly 1 month early. I'm curious how things were coordinated with the residency programs. Were they able to get in a month early and actually participate in the residencies? I'm just wondering how that transition went.
First of all, it would be voluntary if they did that. We don't, once they graduate, it's really up to them. They could volunteer in Massachusetts, or they could go to their new residency and volunteer there. There were some residencies that didn't need them and didn't want to go through the paperwork to start them early. And there were some that New York City was certainly happy to have people that were adequately trained. So it really depended entirely on where they were going, or with some of them volunteered here. We had a number of people who volunteered because we had the field hospital at the convention center with 1,000 beds. And we also had the Newton Pavilion, which had been closed. The state managed to get it reopened with about 3 weeks notice, which I thought was also miraculous. It's like the Chinese putting up hospitals in 3 weeks. They opened it up, and we have 60 COVID patients over at Newton Pavilion because the city was quite aware that if they had COVID positive patients in homeless shelters, everybody would get COVID. So that as soon as there was universal testing of homeless in Boston, and if you were COVID positive, you got a bed at Newton Pavilion where we could take care of you, even if you weren't all that sick, and keep the homeless shelters COVID less worrisome from a COVID perspective.
Karen, this is Lou Sullivan. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes. Could you comment on the fact that your student debt seems to have stabilized or maybe declining? Are there steps that were taken that resulted in that in terms of either the cost to the students or funds available to them? Because as you know, this is a major concern that I've had for a number of years, because it's distorted the students that we're getting into medicine compared to some decades ago.
It also distorts their choice of residencies if they have a lot of debt. As you notice, as you know, we've always been putting up our tuition lower than our peers. So we've dropped from having the highest debt to being about 16th, which still is at the top of the curve, but but much further down. And a lot of very good medical schools are now with higher tuition than we have. But it's also that it's expensive to live in Boston. The student residence helps a lot with that because it's below market rates. It's also safer. But what we did, and then we had this all full court press for getting scholarships, particularly for people who wanted to be pediatricians and primary care doctors. And that actually, if you were a pediatrician and you had debt and you matched, we were able to forgive about $20,000 of each of those students' debt. That's a lot of forgiveness that's on the basis of the endowment that we have for pediatrics and primary care already. That didn't mean that they didn't still have substantial debt, but it's $20,000 less, and they were very grateful. The other thing we did was we took $3 million worth of operating funds, and we basically adjusted over the whole class the debt so that the average debt would not exceed the classes before. So, many years, I'm not sure with COVID that we'll have that option next year, but this was a particularly poor class. It's really interesting. If you look at them versus the other three classes, the expected parental contribution was like a third. And I mean, we're delighted to get not all high socioeconomic group medical students. In fact, I think that's a real problem, that nationally medical students tend to be high socioeconomic groups. So we somehow got a class that actually was poor and they needed more help than the other classes. So we actually took operating dollars and basically fixed it. And rightly so, from my perspective. Lou, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. As you know, NYU and Cornell, and I think Columbia to some degree, were fortunate in having donors who really helped reduce or erase student costs. So I don't know if there's a movement that is beginning. So I'm hoping that we see something like that.
Yeah, they each had people who gave about 200 million. If you happen to know someone who wants their name on a medical school and wants to provide 200 million for scholarships, I'd be happy to talk to them. Those people, I also really, there was one graduation speaker who forgave the debt for all the students in the graduating class of one of the schools. You know, that would be fine, but until then, we obviously have to be relying on these other strategies.
I think Dick might still have a question.
Yes, and I think Dr. Catrambone too.
No, I'm all set. That was an inadvertent hand raise. Sorry about that.
Okay, sorry. And then Rod. So Dr. Catrambone and then Dr. Hockman.
Oh, hi, Rick. I already asked my question.
Oh, okay. And then Rod.
Hi, good morning. I was just thinking, I know you've probably already started planning for the new class coming in. I've gotten a lot of calls from university presidents trying to figure out how they're going to get their kids back or not, or how they're going to do with the next class. So I imagine you've done all that planning already for the new class coming in September.
Stay tuned. Next couple of slides. It's a perfect
Oh,
segue.
okay.
Let's see. David Edelstein had his hand up.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Anybody
thank
else
you.
with their hands up so I can kind of tee you up?
Yeah, so thank you for adapting so quickly. I just have a brief question on the Hippocratic Oath.
Yes.
I remember in our day, we did the Oath of Maimonides. I presume that your Hippocratic Oath is a modified Hippocratic Oath?
Yes.
Is there aspects of the original one with anti-abortion and nepotism that I find heinous?
Yeah, well, don't worry. It's the standard modified.
Thank you.
Karen, Doug McDonald has entered a question. I can read it.
Go ahead.
I was told at a board meeting of another college that international students will apparently not be able to get visas to enter the country due to our consulates being closed. How many international students are at BUSM? Do you anticipate a decrease of the number of students enrolling in the fall, both medical and graduate?
We will discuss that as well. The medical school accreditation requires that the students will have gotten a degree from a U.S. institution, and therefore we have few international students, and of those, most are from Canada. Although there's nothing, I mean, we have students who have graduated from Princeton who are citizens of other countries, so that's okay. For the graduate school, we're following this much more closely because many of our PhDs, postdocs, and master's students will be coming from international areas. Actually, BU has kept housing open for international students, graduate students and otherwise, because these students know that if they go home and then try to come back for graduate school, they'll never get back in the country. So they're literally taking summer courses and living in the dorms. So because we know and they know that we couldn't get them back in the country in the fall. So I thought that was actually a really smart strategy. So I don't think we'll have trouble with Canadians either, but maybe, I mean, who knows? So let's continue with kind of like how we're managing these things. And so anyway, now we're up to today, May 1st. And you can see that at least for Massachusetts, the peak use of resources is supposed to be over, but that's actually not totally true. There is a small, like at BMC, it's 7% decrease in the number of hospitalized patients. I wouldn't call that a decline. So everybody's watching this very carefully. We had the biggest number of deaths 3 days ago. And the deaths do lag cases by about 2 weeks because it takes you that long to get diagnosed, get sicker and sicker, get on a respirator, and then not having us be able to take care of you. So that is about a 10-day, the deaths lag by about 10 days. But it's pretty clear that in Massachusetts, at least, we've got this plateau that is flatter, but not coming down as fast as we would like. But let's continue because I'll show you some statistics. So we are a hot spot. I don't know whether we got there because we have because of academia, we have lots of people coming in and out. It certainly didn't, the Biogen inoculum of COVID did not help us. Or it's because we are on the corridor between New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, and therefore we had infections in the community before we actually knew it, which is most likely true. You can see that California has 10 times as many people in California, and yet they have about half the deaths and just under the number. So despite the fact that they have 10 times as many patients, so California is relatively protected, even though it's fifth. But so you can see that Massachusetts is getting hit really hard here. Next slide. And it's interesting, the death rate in the middle of the state is the highest. So it's a combination probably of having outbreaks and not having good medical care. You can kind of see the map here. This is as of April 28th, because I made the slides 2 days ago. I couldn't, obviously making the slides this morning wasn't gonna work out. But you can see that New York is the big hub, and then it extends north, and you can see the bubbles over various other parts of the country are not quite as impressive as they are in the Northeast. Next slide. So our status as of today, the dental clinics are closed except for emergencies. We have about 1,250 beds that are available, and we've got less than half of those full with COVID positive patients that aren't as sick. We've supposedly passed the peak resource needs on April 26th, but as I suggested, they don't appear to be coming down very quickly. We have enough MDs, but too few nurses, which was kind of interesting. Remember, we have a really good pulmonary research group. We probably have 40 faculty who spend a lot of their time, they're board certified in pulmonary and critical care, but they do a lot of really good NIH funded research. Those all came out of the lab. So we ended up with exactly the specialty that we needed over in the clinic. The pulmonary and critical care with all they're not doing much research, but maybe that wouldn't have been possible anyway. But they just moved over to the clinic and they're taking good care of our patients. We still have limited PPE despite the fact that all the research faculty donated theirs. And that's actually being a problem because when we start to open up for research again, we're gonna have to get some more. We don't have students in clinic because there wasn't enough PPE for them, and the national guidelines suggested that we take them out to be safe for the students at this point. The good news is that although we trained everybody, the personnel, on crisis standards of care, which is basically a word for rationing, it looks like we're not going to have to use it, thank goodness, and that we actually have the resources, the respirators and the ICU beds in Massachusetts, so that we kind of got, if we flatten out the curve as we have not had to go to crisis standards of care, which is basically triaging. And that would be a problem because it would discriminate against our particular patients because they have a lot of chronic underlying diseases. Next slide. This is our finances, and obviously we're watching this, and some of the questions that you've asked come into this area as well, because especially with the master students coming in and being able to keep faculty for that. So our research salaries, in their wisdom, the NIH is paying research salaries, even though they realize that the faculty can't do the work and for the techs and everything, through June. They haven't said what they'll do after that, but it's basically a stimulus. We can't get people into the labs, but we didn't have to furlough them, and therefore they did not lose their job. Foundations and industry grants may not. They haven't really told us, but many of them have indicated that they would. So from a research perspective, we're continuing to be able to pay people. The university put on a hiring freeze as soon as there was a whiff of this, which means that we can't hire anybody who's not 100% grant funded. So we can replace people who are on grants, but we can't replace anybody else until we figure out where this is all going to go, so that we don't have to hire people and fire others. The idea is that we take the people we currently have and spread them around as efficiently as possible and not hire any additional people who aren't completely paid for, so that we can keep some of our powder dry, because we expect there to be problems. We have all renovations on hold. We were going to actually move the microbiology department closer to the needle. Well, that's kind of on hold for now, and rightly so. We lost the medical students' residence rent. We normally have 208 students there. We currently have 50 students. And frankly, from the perspective of keeping them safe, 1 to a room is really better than 2 to a room. So that's okay with me. We have a good number of medical students accepting our offers, the usual number, in fact, for the fall, and we have a really robust waiting list. So I think that people still want to be doctors. Maybe they'll rethink this, but at least for the time being, for August, we think we're good for the dental school. We're tracking the PhD class. It might be smaller. We don't get tuition from PhDs. It's free. In fact, we have to give them stipends. We're worried about our master's students, because if we can't get people back into the class by September, they may put off getting their master's degree for a semester, because basically it would be online learning, and maybe they're not so enthusiastic about that. In order to keep the faculty busy productively for their salaries, we do need to have decent numbers of master's students. And so that's our major vulnerability. This is Doug McDonald's question right on. He's absolutely right about that being the vulnerability. Over on the other campus, we're 10% tuition dependent. The undergraduate campus is 55% tuition dependent. So they're watching the incoming numbers much more carefully and are at much more risk on the other campus than we are. Most of our funding is research funding over here. So we're tracking this, and our financial people are giving us monthly updates on how people are spending, and we're keeping everybody in line. Nobody's allowed to kind of go over at this point, because we want to keep as much of our reserves in case we don't do well with the master students, or in case something else comes up. Questions on the finances and on kind of our being responsible with the with what we have to make available for our students and our researchers so far. We'll continue on recovery plans next. This is where you can really, this is your opportunity to really chime in, because this is all new territory. You all are out in businesses of your own and have been reading and must have some ideas. This is all new territory. So if you've got advice, this is a perfect, and if you have advice tomorrow when you've thought about it for a while, you know my email address. Let's see, any questions? Okay, none so far. I don't see hands.
It's Mary Jane. It's
Yeah,
Mary Jane.
Mary Jane, go ahead.
I wonder how many of the students coming in as freshmen come from outside the United States?
In the medical school class, it's usually somewhere around 6, and like 4 of those would be Canadian.
Okay, good.
And
Because I know we're in more trouble at the School of Public Health. We have more.
Oh, they have a big international group, absolutely.
Correct. And we're very worried about it.
but our master's degrees and our PhDs are international students, and you know we will be over. We're going to be accepting more, figuring that we'll have a bigger melt because they won't be able to get into the country. We're also starting classes in the fall that will be hybrid, so you can come to class, or you can do the first 3 weeks online. We will be doing them simultaneously, so you can, they'll be simulcast. We're gearing up to do this. We've not done this before. This is not what we did in the spring, where we did Zoom and that sort of thing, but and Zoom only. This way the students could sit in the class, or they could end up not getting their visa, and they could take their first 3 or 4 weeks online, and when they get their visa, come on over and finish the course. So we're planning for that. I'm sure the school public health is too.
Yes.
Our students are in before, we'll actually get to try this out before they will, because our students, our second year medical students come back in June, late June, and our first year medical students come back in August 4th. So, and then the school public health and our graduate students come back right after Labor Day. I think it's the 8th.
The end of August.
Yeah, for orientation. So I suspect that we're going to end up having to beta test this for the university.
Thank
Karen,
you.
Karen, I had one
Hi,
question.
Karen. Yes.
Hi, I'm sorry to be joining late. I'm dealing on the other line with international coronavirus response funding. And so I'm curious, maybe you're going to get into this in the next slide, but what approaches have you taken in terms of getting funding through the 4 coronavirus bills that have passed and been signed into law?
We have initially, even without those available, we had about 37 people who filed IRBs and pilot grants initially to move to COVID research, and therefore were exempted from the requirement for minimizing their research. We figured that essential research included COVID research, so if the researcher could pivot their research program to COVID research, they went gangbusters. We also had a pilot, our CTSI, Clinical Translational Research Institute. The grant was paid April 1st, and we knew that the money was coming in, and they sent out pilot grant applications in March when this was all happening. And we got 57 pilot, so that people can get 20 to 50,000 for pilot grants. And then the NIH, as part of the bills, allowed supplements to grants already funded so that they could get the money out faster, that only required administrative review. And so a number of our faculty applied for those supplements and have been funded for those as well. Harvard had a donation from a Chinese organization and put out an RFA, request for, RFP, request for proposals. And some of our people signed up for those as well. So these are early sources of money that people have access to for COVID research. So I would say there's probably over 100 new investigators doing COVID research already, even without getting much more additional funding. Good question.
Karen, Reshma has a comment.
Great, go ahead.
Aaron, given the kind of students that we have, especially the point you made about the lower socioeconomic level, particularly this year, and the work that we do, has BMC or BUSM been able to avail themselves of the Boston Resiliency funds?
I don't know about BMC specifically, whether they're into that fund. I do know that they've gotten waivers and they've gotten some funds. I don't know exactly what the source of those funds were, a substantial amount. And I know that they have been the recipient of a good deal of philanthropy, like spectacularly good, for obvious reasons as well. And that their board is really kicking in donations. And actually one of our alums arranged for masks for BMC because he remembered doing his rotations at BMC, and so we've had people who are BU trustees who are our alums helping BMC and our faculty have access to these. So I know that they've gotten a fair amount of funding. I just don't know whether they had that specific funding. And if you know about that, if you email me, I would be happy to ask them if they have gotten funds from that specific one. And I see Shamim has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, yeah, do you have the scenarios all set up for, say, fall, it does not happen? And what are you going to do? Are you going to do the inline learning, or then start in January, or where is your thought process in just in case it doesn't happen?
Just a beautiful segue. Hold a couple of slides, okay, Shamim?
Okay.
You know exactly where we're going, because obviously we can't do recovery planning without starting to answer some of those questions. It's really, in the first 3 weeks, I can't believe how busy it was, because it was crisis management, and everybody, you forget the weekends, it was 24/7 for 3 weeks. And then the fires have been coming much less fast, and we're shifting into planning for recovery mode. So perfect timing of that particular question. Next slide. Yep. So academic functions are continuing. So this is the present day. Our faculty appointments and promotions meetings have just moved to Zoom. So our faculty are continuing to get appointed so we can replace people, and the promotions are coming through. I send them over to the other campus and they come back. We are doing committee retreats and planning, which is great because we often didn't, it's hard to get on people's schedule. Right now we can start to get on their schedules. We've done we've got the second town meeting for faculty, students, and staff, and it's kind of nice to have them all together on a town meeting on COVID. We have got another town meeting a week from now on basically recovery planning for the faculty, staff, and students so that they can ask all their questions. Here's the admissions cycle. This gets into some questions that Doug was answering. So the MD numbers are the same as last year. The master's program, we're up 6%. But I think that some of that's going to go away in the melt, so that doesn't that doesn't worry me. In fact, I'm worried the other way. And PhD programs are up 2%, but again, I don't know how this is going to turn out in the fall. Next slide. So the university is putting in their plans, and obviously their campus is very different from our campus. They're planning for virtual classes and events through August. So they canceled all of the in-person summer programs, but they exempted us. That means that if the governor says that we can start to do non-essential travel as of May 18th, and if the national AAMC accreditation people say students can go back to the clinic and start taking care of patients again, that means that from the university's perspective, our clinical patients, and that includes also our mental health, genetics, counseling, and imaging students in GMS, will be able to go back and see patients if it's safe, if they have enough PPE. They're not going to be seeing COVID patients, but actually there's starting to be discussion amongst the medical school deans, who by the way meet by Zoom at 8 o'clock every Monday night. There's starting to be discussion that this is going to be around for the next 2 years. We better start teaching medical students to take care of COVID patients now that we know kind of better how to do it, and now that we don't have a critical lack of PPE for the actual docs, so that we can now start to share the PPE with the medical students, and it would be safe for them. So there's the discussion about getting the students back into clinics this summer, if possible. And then the universities develop a research and education recovery plans, and we'll get into those in a second. Next slide. So that's what they were doing, but we obviously have to be doing it for our own campus. We are planning for an incremental return. I think that even if the governor said on May 18th, yes, we can open up, we would still have major restrictions on the number of researchers. We would start with research. On the number of researchers we would allow in the lab. They need to be 6 feet apart think about all the practical applications. First of all, they have to take their temperature in the morning and attest that they do not have a fever and answer 4 or 5 questions before we let them in the building. And then the corridors will be one way. There'll be tape on the floor, and the stairwells will be one way. And by the way, you can only put one person on an elevator at a time, and therefore there's going to be lots of walking. So these are just some of the kind of like the new normal. And then if all goes well, we'll gradually incrementally increase the number of researchers that are allowed. But the good news about research is it's relatively not dense. But the trouble is when you've got 2 people who have to be working together, how do you do that if they have to stay 6 feet apart? Next slide. We're planning to take into consideration that there could very well be a second wave. If you look at I just put some countries up so you can see we're kind of in the US, we're not coming down as fast as the ones in yellow. Those countries went up and came down fairly quickly. The steep declines are in blue. Those countries basically locked up their people and it did work. But the US government didn't do that. So we're kind of varying around a plateau. Next slide. But we think that we could have a second wave. In fact, we might even be likely to have a second wave. We'd really be happy if the second wave wasn't as big as the first wave, but it actually could be. And in fact, theoretically, it could be bigger. And so we're planning what we would do because it's entirely possible that we would ramp up research and the clinical people coming back to classes, and then we would have to ramp it down again. So we're trying to figure out what would be the triggers for releasing the restrictions, and obviously we'll be guided by the mayor and the governor. We're certainly not going to do anything that isn't okay for the state, but we may actually have other criteria within the medical campus and within the university to keep our faculty, staff, and students safe while we try to resume a relatively normal university. If you do the math, even in the fall, if our biggest auditoria is 250 students and our class is 150 students and they have to stay 6 feet apart, we're going to be able to put maybe 40 students in an auditoria for 250 at most. We're counting on the students being a little uncomfortable and that some of them choosing not to sit in the auditorium and therefore they could be online in order to actually make this work. And that's why we would be having both, even under the best of circumstances, we would probably be having in-class and online courses being given at the same time. And the people online could be asking questions just like the people in the class. In fact, since it's easier to do that from your, I would be willing to bet that the students will sit there in their pajamas and do that, or would be more likely to. But we certainly have to be planning for that second wave. Next slide. We don't have it yet. Again, Corey, you might want to just try to keep ahead of me. Yeah. So these are the dates that our students come back. And you can see that the May 18th is the day that it just happened to be the day that the medical student 3s are coming back. They were supposed to have taken their boards. All the boards, the places where they could have taken the first step of their boards have been canceled. Even students that have seats that were for after May 18th, every other student was canceled because they now have to maintain 6 feet around the students too in the testing centers. So even our students that were scheduled after May 18th, and the students are berserk at this point, by the way, as you can imagine, probably the biggest issue is the anxiety of the students because they don't know what's going to happen and we can't tell them. We can tell them that at a national level, we don't do the boards, the boards do the boards, that they have scheduled multiple dates that they have shortened the board test, and that they will do 2 groups of people taking the boards per day once we're back up and running again, and they have added extra slots so that they hope to get the students back up and being able to take the board sometime in June, July, or August. But that's a major problem. We have the same problem with the MedCats for incoming students. There's no way you can take the MedCats right now. You can see then by June 1st, the 4th year students are back, and we want to get them in the clinic as fast as possible. Remember, those were the ones who were the 3rd year students that got pulled out of their clinical rotations. And if they're going to be good doctors, we need to get them back into the first slots that open up in the clinics they're going to get, because they need to get back in there, do sub-Is, and make up for the clinical things that we couldn't teach them in March and April that they didn't get last year before breaking to try to take step 2 of their boards, which they also couldn't take. The next crew comes in July 13th, and those are our 2nd year class. We hope to have them back in the classroom by that time, along those lines of the inline and in class. And then the 1st year students come back August 3rd. So we'll have 2 classes in where we can actually divide them up into the available classrooms. And then the graduate students and the master's students are back September 8th. And boy, do we hope that things are better by that time and that we're not in a second wave. And that's when that's when the school public health students will be back. The dental students, by the way, are back over the summer too, like our medical students, but they have their own classrooms. So this is, Shamim, this is how we plan on doing the in-clinic and in-class plans for the fall so far. And again, we're all open to your suggestions. Many of you are alums or parents and have some experience with this. Next slide. Oh yeah, this is it. Oh, thank you, Corey. You basically stayed ahead. So we've got to do orientation for the 3s and 4s. We've got to figure out how to get them their step 1. So they're going to have to be able to take off a day to take their step 1, because we're going to have to just take the test while they're in the middle of rotations. So they've got to be able to step out for the day. We have an option for an all virtual classroom for the first 16 weeks if we have to, but then they got to get into the clinic or they won't be good doctors. And for the M4s that are coming back on June 1st, we have the option for virtual classrooms if we have to. And the anatomy, pharmacology, and physiology people are up to giving them month-long courses in advanced pharmacology. Everybody could use that, or advanced physiology. The surgeons could certainly use advanced anatomy. And we can give the standardized patient assessments if we have to virtually. We did that with the standardized patients. It's not ideal, but you can do it. So we do have options if we can't get them into the clinic. Because it's just not safe, or the governor says we can't. Then we have the M2s. They're supposed to be assessed on physical exam in late August. We sure hope they're back in the clinic by late August. They can't do their longitudinal preceptors unless they're back into the clinics, and that starts in the fall. We will switch them to telehealth experience because they're going to need that. That's, I'm sure, what's going to happen in the future. So if we have to, we'll do telehealth experience until we can get them into the clinic. And then the M1s come back, and their anatomy course is scheduled after a month. They start out with orientation and then some of the classroom stuff, and then they get into anatomy in September 21st. I certainly hope we can get them into an anatomy lab by September 21st. That group is broken up into groups. Obviously, we would spread them around the anatomy lab. And we would have to spread them out further, but I think that we probably will have them back into the anatomy lab by September. It'll be harder to do their doctoring courses if we can't get them into the clinics.
Karen,
yeah,
I'm not sure what you want to do, but we're about 15 minutes behind schedule, and I want to, and so I'm not sure what Ron Corley's availability is. Okay. Are there any slides you might want us to just jump to in your presentation?
I think this is it. This is basically the summary.
Okay, and any questions, we will have to get back to folks after this session. We'll have all of the questions saved.
So what we've been talking about are the kind of the phases of managing this particular situation, and you can see them here. We had the response period, rebound is starting now, then we rebuild, welcoming our new classes back, managing our financials to make sure that we're stable, and facilitating the research initiatives that have to come out of this. And then we reimagine. There's going to be some silver lining on this. I can't imagine patients going back to non-telehealth again, for example, and some of the things that we'll have to do for educating students to the new normal. So let's get on to Ron, and we'll come back to questions if we have a chance. I would be happy to talk to each of you online in a Zoom yourself, and we can talk about these things, and you can give me your suggestions. We can schedule that later since we have a shortened forum. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. Lee, would you like to introduce Dr. Corley?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Dean Antman. I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Ron Corley. He's a professor of microbiology and director of the National Emerging Infectious Diseases Laboratory, the NEEDLE. He's here today to provide an update on coronavirus research initiatives happening at Boston University. Welcome, Dr. Corley.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen here. So can you see that?
Yes.
Yep. All right, so what I'd like to do is kind of give you an update on where we are and how we got there in terms of coronavirus research, not only at the NEEDLE, but also in the greater Boston University School of Medicine community. I have, let me say at the start, I have never seen anything like this in my life, and I suspect most of us haven't. But this has been an incredible learning experience for all of us on how to ramp up to a pandemic. So just as a reminder, we're only 4 months into this. It was the end of December when Wuhan authorities alerted the World Health Organization that there was in fact some undiagnosed pneumonia that was circulating. And within 7 days of that notification, the Wuhan Institute for Virology put the entire sequence of the virus that they had cultured from these patients onto the web. And it was absolutely clear that it was a coronavirus. And coronaviruses, just as a reminder, are a fairly large 30 kilobase single-stranded RNA virus that has 4 structural proteins and then a large number of what they call non-structural proteins, many of which are involved in antagonizing the immune response, so that when they infect cells, cells won't necessarily detect the fact that they have been infected for some period of time. So what got a lot of our attention, and I was astonished when I actually saw this particular slide, that when you look at the SARS epidemic, because this is, closely related to SARS, about 80% identical to SARS. When you look at the SARS epidemic was controlled with public health control measures. This epidemic just really took off. And there could easily be 2 reasons for this, and there's probably both of these reasons. It may have been circulating wider in the Chinese community population before there was a significant recognition that it was there, and I think we know that that's true. But on the other hand, the transmission dynamics may in fact be quite different. And if you look at the novel coronavirus, it's different from SARS. And that SARS, if you look at the viral load in the upper respiratory tract, doesn't really peak until about 10 days after symptoms have developed. So it's not as infectious prior to symptomology. And so you can control it by doing that. The SARS-CoV-2, this particular virus, has very high viral loads soon after symptom onset. And in fact, there's already virus before symptom onset. And when they do large scale studies, Iceland is a good example. 50% of the population that tested positive were asymptomatic at the time they were diagnosed. That doesn't mean they didn't go on to get symptoms, but they didn't know that they actually had the infection. And it's pretty clear now that there is asymptomatic transmission of this particular virus. So there's a lot to know. So we needed to start a new virus program. And I must say, while individual investigators start new programs one at a time, I don't think we'd ever done it on the level of an entire institute. How do we organize ourselves? And so first of all, we had to see what was the faculty interest and what was the expertise. It may be surprising to you to know that there was not a single coronavirus researcher at Boston University. In fact, there was not a single coronavirus researcher in the entire Boston community at any of the medical schools. It's a fairly small field because most of them are, of the viruses that impact people are rather benign. They cause common colds, they cause a little upper respiratory infection. And so it hadn't been a high priority for funding for a long time. So then we had to figure out who wants to train up to begin to study these viruses. How do we get the space ready? We had a large number of researchers already working at biosafety level 4. We had 2 labs working at biosafety level 3, but neither of them working on a respiratory virus. And then you have to figure out, do you have the tools and technology to study it? Can you even get the virus? Because you have to have a patient that someone has isolated a virus from before you can actually get a copy of the virus. And then you have to go through all of the usual regulatory process of material transfer agreements, regulatory permits. And then you get, when you can get the virus, then you can distribute it to approved researchers. So this is our timeline. And I think it shows you that from our perspective, things were moving glacially slow, even though in fact, this is actually a pretty rapid ramp up from beginning to end. But part of our concerns were what was going on in the world. So in early February, we started planning to start writing institutional biosafety committee protocols to get the virus. And we did it in 2 different ways. The first one was just to get the virus. And then other people were writing them to begin studying the viruses. And at the time we submitted the first protocol on February 11th, there were only 15 US cases. We got the Institutional Biosafety Committee approval within 8 days, which was a record. Boston Public Health approval the very next day, which was also a record, which meant that we could now order the virus because it had become available now in the United States. And within a week, we received the virus. And now we've gone from 15 cases to 60 cases in the US. At the same time, we had other protocols that were going through for actual getting the work done. They take a little bit longer to do this. But the first one got approved on March 18th. And the very next day, we transferred the virus to Rob Davey. And Karen has also already mentioned him. And that's Rob with the original bucket of virus that we had received and we're holding on to. And this is his lab. Rob Davey works primarily at biosafety level 4, and he does high throughput screening for diagnostic purposes, and all of his instrumentation was set up in 4. And rather than trying to duplicate it in 3, he just figured he would study the virus at 4, and that creates some issues that we had to work through. But we were able to accommodate that program. And he's been working ever since on therapeutic screening. This is another investigator that got approved very quickly after Rob did. This is Helke Mühlberger. And the reason I show this slide is to show you, in fact, that what do you have to do when you start working with the new virus? You have to develop, it's not just the virus you need all the reagents and the tools that you have. So this is an antibody that's made against a SARS protein that happens to cross-react with SARS-CoV. So both Rob and ALCA have been using that antibody to basically identify infected cells. So there's a big ramp up for actually trying to develop all the tools and reagents that you need. Now, virtually everybody in the needle has in fact turned their attention to this virus at this particular time. It's not that they've put down their other interests, but they recognize the importance of really moving along. So we have a large number. I kind of divided them into two pots like this: clinical and preclinical studies. So Nahid Bedalia, who has an IRB protocol on looking at the natural history study of healthcare workers so that we can follow people over time. And for those that get infected, then we can also look at survivors. And she also has an IBC protocol that allows us to now get access, which we will within the next few days, to some of the Biogen survivors so that we can get convalescent serum. This is really important for standardizing a lot of the assays. David Hamer is doing the global surveillance network through GeoSentinel. Anthony Griffiths, who does animal modeling and is interested in pathogenesis, testing therapeutic and vaccine candidates. Rob Davey, Mohsen Saeed, and Rachel Ferns are all starting programs on looking at therapeutics and therapeutic targets, particularly Mohsen and Rachel, particular proteins that they're interested in as targets. John Connor for diagnostics and disease biomarkers. And we have an anatomic pathologist that's interested in the pathology of this disease. And then we have others that include Florian Duam, who's interested in vaccines and has some interesting humanized mouse models to study the disease. Elke Molberger, I already mentioned. Ram Gomaluru is mainly an HIV researcher, but he's interested in inflammation, and he really wants to understand the innate response to SARS-CoV-2 and how it changes with aging. And then Anna Halko is interested in immune response in general. So we also recognized while we were trying to accelerate our research programs that there were critical needs in the community and the medical community as well. The diagnostic kits, Karen has already mentioned, that the Center for Regenerative Medicine with George Murphy took the lead on that to start helping the pathology lab, which is one floor above, to help get an in-house diagnostic kit going, because right now, at that time, patients were waiting 3 to 4 days to get their results. And this way they could get them turned around in a day. Everyone was worried about N95 respirators and personal protective equipment and whether they could be reused. And then the serologic assays so that you could really start figuring out who had been exposed and recovered from the disease. So one of the studies that was done in the needle was done by Anthony Griffiths and our environmental health and safety people, who were contacted by the Mass General Hospital to ask if we could actually do the virologic testing to figure out if vaporized hydrogen peroxide actually killed the virus on N95 masks. And we partnered with a company in Needham, B&V Testing, to actually demonstrate that that was a safe method for being able to reuse N95 respirators. And that's a process that's now being done widely in the community to try to make N95s available. So we also started working on serologic assays. You can't really work on them easily until you have a lot of convalescent serum. But luckily the Boston community was exchanging reagents very early on. And we wanted our own in-house serology assay. And part of the reason for that was because it not only gives you information on asymptomatic infections and the true number of infected individuals, but there are a lot of other reasons that you want this. First of all, do all recovered patients have high concentrations of antibodies? Are there age, gender, or racial differences? It's important for us to figure out if seroconverted persons are actually resistant to infection. And if so, how does that correlate with the level of antibodies in their plasma? And how long do these antibodies last? And what is the correlation, as I said, with immune protection? Because if this protection wanes over a period of time, we need some early warning to know that. And that information is important for how we develop vaccines and vaccine strategies. Now, it wasn't just BU that was working on this. A group of individuals really championed early on by Bruce Walker at the Ragon Institute of Harvard and MIT. George Daly, the dean over there, contacted me and a number of other people to ask whether or not we'd like to set up really a consortium to exchange information, data, and divide it into these 6 working groups. And in fact, this has turned out to be an incredibly valuable opportunity. And science is being done in such a different way. We have, I think I counted this week, 10 meetings, Zoom meetings this week, in various areas from this consortium to allow people to exchange information, identify tools that they need, and identify individuals who have those tools. It has been a remarkable thing that I've never seen before. Science is competitive, and yet people are really sharing broadly. Within the Boston University School of Medicine, we also started this Affinity Research Collaborative because people in the Needle were already working with people in the Center for Regenerative Medicine. They were working with people in the Pulmonary Center, and these groups now have weekly calls to really talk about the science that we're doing and to try to strategize how we manage and organize ourselves in order to exchange reagents, information, and not duplicate efforts. And all of these groups have been important in helping us get some instrumentation, which continues to be the biggest need, is getting the right instrumentation at the right biosafety level. So I mentioned that there was, you know, a lot of collaboration that's going on at the same time. There is this fire hose of data. This, I don't think anyone had ever seen before. This is from February, which shows that the number of papers being published on bioarchives and med archives, these are pre-publication, these are not peer-reviewed papers, are just putting them right out there. And that was actually tracking at that time at the same rate that the actual published papers were being brought out. And the problem is that so much is happening. You have to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff and trying to figure out what's real, what's not. No one's doing complete studies. These are all very small studies. And so, you know, they have a high rate of error within them. And even recently, the New York Times noted that this is forcing medical research to speed up. And that is not only a good thing because it gives you some information very quickly, but it's also a very bad thing because there's a lot of incomplete or incorrect information out there as well. So we're having to sort through this all at the same time. But because this outbreak has gotten so big, we begin to see new things clinically, and our clinicians tell us about these on weekly calls on the clinical aspects of them. But you know, there's a lot of new recognized symptoms, which not only of chills, but muscle pain, headaches, sore throats, loss of taste or smell. I'm sure y'all have heard of this. And I heard an otolaryngologist talking a couple of days ago about how this is so different from other types of viral diseases, GI aspects and so on. So we're beginning to recognize that this is not just a lung infection, but it's more of a systemic disease than we recognized at the beginning. There are lots of heart issues that are associated with this. We're seeing strokes in young people that were otherwise reasonably well, skin rashes, and something called COVID toes. And they think all of this is probably related to the coagulopathy disorders that you see with this disease. And one of the questions that we want to address in this is how much of this is viral mediated, but how much of it is also mediated by the immune system that's trying to respond to the virus in the body. So there's a lot to still be done, and I will just leave you with, you know, will there be a post-COVID-19 world? I suspect not in the near future, but, you know, trying to develop the tools that allow us to effectively adapt to a COVID-19 positive world are critical for us all to build. And that means effective therapeutics and at least some short-term vaccines, and of course, better diagnostic platforms. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Dr. Corley, a question came through our chat box from Dr. McDonald asking, what is your confidence in the PCR and serological tests given the false positive and negative rates, as well as the narrow window of opportunity to detect the virus in a biosample?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and the reality is those tests are fraught with difficulties, and part of the PCR method is only as good as the sample that you get, and I think we all know of people testing negative and then testing positive. So there are a lot of effort that's going into trying to refine those PCR assays and trying to use something else other than PCR, direct antigen types of diagnostic assays. The serology is also problematic. I mean, there's like 100 kits out there that are serologic, some of which are FDA on emergency use approved. All of them, I think you're hearing about the difficulties with these. They give you a lot of false positives. It'll be even worse if they give us false negatives. It'll be even worse if they give us false positives. It's one of the reasons we wanted to develop an in-house serologic assay because, and I was talking with the pathology chief yesterday, is that it would be nice to be able to compare between the rapid tests that are going to be rolled out for serologic testing in the diagnostic centers against a more conventional type of ELISA platform. And it's really interesting, the diagnostic platforms that are rapidly have been run out detect two of the conventional antibody isotypes, IgM and IgG. What's unusual about this disease is that IgA antibodies seem to come up as quickly as IgM, probably because it's a respiratory infection. But none of the commercial kits yet test for IgA, and they may be a better readout for it. So we've included IgAs as well as all the IgG isotypes in our serologic assay that we're trying to refine and develop and work through the issues on.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Corley? Well, yes, Leslie. You can turn off your mic. Yep, there you go.
Dr. Corley, I was wondering if you have a gut feeling at this point in time in terms of how rapidly we're seeing mutations and whether or not that will actually affect clinically what this virus begins to look like. And do you think that, well, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. This virus, like every RNA virus, mutates as it moves through the population. And viral geneticists use that information to be able to track the virus. Right. For example, there was the first patient in Washington, in the state of Washington. They thought they had quarantined and identified all of his contacts very early on. And then they started seeing additional individuals in Canada, as well as Washington and Oregon, that had the same virus, saying that they had missed a bunch of people. If you look at the mutations, that's how we knew that in New York, most of the New York infections didn't come directly from China. They came, in fact, from Italy, because there had already been a series of mutations that had developed that were not found in the Chinese cohort that were then found in Italy. And so we could tell that the virus actually came from there. So the question you ask is, do those mutations, will they lead to differences in symptomology? And we don't yet know the answer to that. There have been a couple of hints that there may be some slight differences, and that may account for some of the additional symptomology that we're seeing here. But I don't know that yet, but I think that's really a very important question.
Thank you.
Dr. Shamim Dahoud?
Dr. Corley, I just had can you comment on vaccines? What's going on right now? or what do you predict is going to happen, or any information?
Vaccine. So as you know, Moderna was the first one to jump into clinical trials in the United States. And there's a company that was established by Oxford University that also has a clinical trial going. And both of those were able to go into clinical trials very rapidly because the safety testing on the design of the vaccines had already been done for other diseases. So whether or not they're actually going to be effective is a totally different question, but we know at least that they're safe. We think they're safe. And I say think because there's some funny things about antibodies with coronaviruses. Sometimes the antibodies actually enhance disease rather than repress disease. So I think it's going to be a slow, methodical approach to move these out. My biggest concern is that with the seasonal coronaviruses that we see, the ones that give you colds or upper respiratory infections, we know that people can get repeatedly infected with those over time. So we believe, based on those studies, that for many coronaviruses, infection may not give you lifelong immunity. It may give you a disease of immunity. And I think one of the important questions is to figure out how long the average individual stays immune will inform whether or not this becomes a seasonal vaccine once they're developed, or whether you have to re-immunize people every 2 or 3 years. I think it's a totally open question still.
Dr. Patricia Williams had a question on how does the COVID coagulopathy differ from DIC? This is from the chat.
Well, what I've been reading in the literature is that they look very similar, but the COVID induced coagulopathy is a little different from the standard disseminated one because there are a few ratios and proteins that are not found in similar levels. But what I've also read is that as the coagulopathy becomes more like DIC, the disseminated version, that's a very bad prognosis for patients. There's now some evidence that the arterial linings get infected. There are a lot of clots that are occurring in individuals over time. And I think this is still a completely, all the information we're getting right now is still anecdotal. We don't know scientifically the basis for so much of this yet.
I think we're going to need to move on to the next presentation, but if you have questions, you can either put it in the chat box or we can get back to you. If you put it in the chat box, we'll get back to you with the answer subsequently.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Ron.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Julie Palmer, who serves in multiple roles at BUSM, including Karen Grunebaum Cancer Research Professor, Director of the Sloan Epidemiology Center, and co-director of the BMC Cancer Center. She is also the principal investigator of the Black Women's Health Study, which is in its 25th year. Today, she will be providing us an update on this important work. And welcome, Dr. Palmer.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this chance to share the work of our study. So it was just 25 years ago this month that the Black Women's Health Study began. We did a blind mailing to several 100,000 women who were subscribers to Essence magazine. Based on our piloting, we knew how many to mail to in order to get our target of 50,000. In fact, we ended up with 59,000 women who enrolled by completing a 14-page scannable questionnaire. So they provided a lot of information on their current health status, on behavioral factors, and diet. We have since then mailed another questionnaire every 2 years. We have an 80% response rate of the original cohort at every 2 years, which is pretty fantastic. And the follow-up questions are much shorter, of course. They're about 4 pages. And we ask a whole page of major health conditions and commonly used medications. And then we have other questions that address new hypotheses that have come up over the years. This slide just shows the distribution of the participants at a baseline. The median age was 38, so now the median age is 63. So we still have a fair number of younger women in the study, and we have a lot who are at ages at which cancer becomes more common. And this study has been funded primarily by the National Cancer Institute. As planned, they're from all regions of the US and different educational levels, although most have at least a high school education, which is necessary for a questionnaire-based study and represents at least 80% of Black women of the same birth cohorts. This shows you an example of one of our questionnaires and what someone's looking at when they get it. And as I said, we ask about a lot of questions. Some get repeated every 2 years and some are new. Besides getting information from the questionnaires, we also link with several different databases. The cancer registries to get information on tumor characteristics and confirm self-reports of cancer. We're now using Medicare data, linking to those data to find out about non-cancer conditions or to confirm self-reports, also to find out about treatments for cancer. We have linked to census data for addresses every 2 years throughout the study, and that gives us information on several different characteristics that are related to health and are not an individual factor, but represent the environment in which someone lives. We also have linked to EPA data. We have lots of different environmental exposures and have published on different factors of air pollution in relation to several outcomes. And finally, we've been collecting biospecimens. So the first thing we were able to do was ask for saliva samples, which are a good basis for germline DNA. And 50% of the participants gave a DNA sample. They've been stored, we've extracted the DNA, and we've used them in analyses of germline genetic variants in relation to 3 or 4 cancers and other conditions. More recently, we're able to get blood samples, which is what we would have liked to get sooner, but we have them now and they're extremely valuable and will be more valuable in the future because as the same women who gave the sample 5 years ago or 4 years ago in the future develops cancer, we now have a pre-diagnostic blood sample, which is very important for looking at predicting the risk. So we have 13,300 in that. Most of the assays will be done on a nested case control basis. That's the only cost-effective way. But we were able to get 2 biomarkers on everyone in the cohort. One was hemoglobin A1C, which we think is a pretty important measure for lots of health outcomes. The other was vitamin D or 25-OHD. For cancers, we're trying to obtain tumor tissue, and we store that in tumor tissue microarrays when possible. And we've been using it for lots of different things, including extraction of DNA and RNA to look more at the tumors themselves. We've started with breast cancer, but we're moving on to the other solid tumors. And finally, we've collected a lot of digital mammograms, more than one from each person, not just from our breast cancer cases, but also from women without cancer, so that we can, in the future, do a lot of research on mammographic density and other features. So that's our data. We have quite a bit of community involvement, both with our participants, for example, sending a newsletter every 6 months to participants, and also to the wider community of Black women. In the last few years, we've put out a Facebook page, and so a lot of different people look at that. And this slide shows the many conditions that we have published on so far. And you can see cancer has been a major thrust. We've also been looking at reproductive outcomes, autoimmune conditions, coronary heart disease, and stroke. We had an early grant on type 2 diabetes and published on many different modifiable factors, including dietary factors for diabetes. And then there's a lot of varied other conditions. And what almost all of them have in common is that they are diseases or health conditions that are more common in African Americans than in other populations. And that's the point of our study, is to really have the research go where it hasn't gone before. I have a few slides which I'll go over very quickly, just highlighting a little bit of our published research to give you a flavor. Of course, I had to show one of our New England Journal papers, but we did this. You would think it's obvious that the greater weight and excess weight would be related to increased risk of death, but there's been a lot of controversy on that, and that's reached the popular press as well, with some saying that actually it's healthier to be overweight. And then others, especially epidemiologists, have argued, no, there were flaws in the studies that showed that. So we had enough data in the Black Women's Health Study to look at this, and we found that sure enough, with every increase in level of body mass index, starting from the breakpoint for normal, the mortality rates increased. Breast cancer has been a big focus. To date, there are 2,500 new breast cancer cases that have come within our cohort of 59,000 women. We developed a risk prediction model for breast cancer because the existing model, the Gale model that we all know and has been widely used, was shown to be hardly better than flipping a coin for Black women. And as a result, Black women were left out of a lot of the cancer prevention trials because their risk was estimated to be lower than the threshold that was a cutoff point for being in the trial, since the trials wanted high-risk women. Therefore, we developed this model. I won't go into the details of how we did it, but using our data, it came out showing, classifying more women as higher risk. Still, though, isn't optimal, which is why I now have a grant to take a different approach and consider the two main types of breast cancer, estrogen receptor positive and estrogen receptor negative, which we and others have now shown to have some different risk factors. And we think that this approach will be especially beneficial for predicting breast cancer in Black women because there's a higher proportion of estrogen receptor negative breast cancer in Black women than in other populations. Completely different topic. I highlight this both because of the exposure and the disease. We have asked several sets of questions on both discrimination and everyday racism experiences. From these measures, we were able to get a score. We've asked a couple times, and then we look at conditions that have occurred after we asked the questions. And we have found associations between having experienced higher levels of racism or discrimination on the job with the police in housing in relation to, for example, type 2 diabetes, obesity, asthma, adult onset asthma. And this paper, we also found that women who reported more of those experiences were more likely to suffer from insomnia. And insomnia and sleep disorders is another research area in the Black Women's Health Study. I'll mention again in a minute. As the cohort has aged, we have more cancers of other types. So we are now having grants for studying other things. And there's been a real interest in whether oral health is somehow related to pancreatic cancer risk. And we have a grant to look at the characteristics of the oral microbiome using our saliva samples and using what has come out of the microbiome, the Human Microbiome Project, to actually characterize from our pancreatic cancer cases and then a group of women without it, what's in there. And we're working on a paper for that right now. But in the meantime, we just looked at questionnaire-based information on oral health and found that sure enough, women who had poor oral health had a significantly increased risk of developing pancreatic cancer. Whether that's because microorganisms travel to the pancreas through the digestive system, or more likely the inflammation created through having a lot of inflammation in the mouth travels through the bloodstream and causing chronic inflammation, is what influences the higher risk. We don't know, but this is a beginning area of research. And finally, a latest study, which we thought would be published this week, but we're still waiting to find out when it's coming out. This is a collaboration with 9 other studies. And you can see from this slide that the Black Women's Health Study has contributed the most. The point of this study is to look at the rare mutations in genes such as BRCA1 and BRCA2 in African Americans to determine if the same associations are present, what are the mutations that are important, and most importantly, can the gene testing panels that are widely used now for women who have breast cancer, do they apply to Black women with breast cancer? And if so, can we increase the rates of testing? So this shows the main results of the study. And we found that, yes, the associations are similar among these 5,000 cases of breast cancer in Black women, 5,000 controls. The blue lines represent the cases, and we see that for the BRCA1, BRCA2, and 6 or 7 other genes, there was a greatly elevated risk of breast cancer on the order of from 3 to 8 times the risk of having breast cancer if a woman had mutations. This will be a landmark paper because there have only been very small papers before, and for the first time we're looking at something other than BRCA1. And we hope this will have an effect on availability of testing. And finally, I'd just like to talk about other current research projects and future ones, just to show you a list of, this is some of our funded projects that I haven't talked about too much before. And just going down to the end of this list, we have our first 2 randomized trials within this cohort of women. And this is actually a good way to do a small randomized trial because you have an interested population and you already know a lot of things about women, so you can offer the trial to the right people. So the first one is we are testing an insomnia treatment. One of these things, I forget the name of it, but that you have an online kind of program that the participant relates to every morning and every evening. And what is available hasn't been tested in a Black population. So we're doing that. We're also modifying it some based on early results to see if it will be effective in Black women. And then the second one builds off the study I talked about. We are now with an investigator at the School of Public Health who does a lot on genetic testing in terms of whether people who have a disease are interested in, or who may have a high risk, are interested in finding out whether they have a mutation in a gene. So we are going to test different ways of getting the information, not just the usual make an appointment with a genetic counselor. And we're hoping that those new methods will make more women feel comfortable getting those results. Finally, these are some of our newest areas that we are now seeking funding to do. And you probably know that at BUSM, there are several really renowned researchers in the field of Alzheimer's disease, and we are collaborating with them on doing that type of research in our aging population. We're also working with some investigators at Harvard on circadian rhythm in relation to different outcomes. We have our first grant on stroke about to begin. We're very interested in multiple myeloma and its precursor, MGUS. We've just had some pilot money to screen 1,000 women in our study, and we found a surprisingly high proportion of them had MGUS, which usually goes undiagnosed and is a precursor to myeloma. And finally, we, like others, are trying to do research on COVID-19. We just received our first grant from the American Heart Association to look within our cohort over the next year at complications in women who have become infected or will become in the next few months infected with the virus. We've already had many of our participants contact us and say they are sick with the disease. So we'll be looking especially at cardiovascular outcomes. And thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Palmer? You can raise your hand or put them in the chat box.
Dr. Sullivan?
Dr. Sullivan, your mute is on.
Now,
Good.
is it better? Fine.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. The question I have is there's the Jackson Heart study that was started after the Framingham study was initiated. And as you know, this began at Boston University with Tom Dauber, who was on the faculty when I was a student there. Can you tell me, have you compared your findings with the Jackson Heart study, which was begun because the Framingham Heart study did not have enough African-American individuals in it? And if you have compared your results, would you comment on the similarities or the differences that you found?
Thank you. We haven't done a lot of comparisons so far because our studies have been on different tracks in that ours is a large study but suffers from having to get the information from mailed questionnaires. So our people live all over the country. We've been able to do a lot with cancer because if you have a large study, you have large numbers of cancer. The Jackson Heart study is many times smaller, but it benefits from being located in one place, and like the Framingham study, has very deep information because the participants come in for exams. So they have had a really big focus, like Framingham, on heart disease and stroke, and have been really prolific on that. So we're just at the point now where they're starting to have enough breast cancers to look at that, and we're starting to be able to confirm our strokes and heart disease. That's the problem we have, is we have a lot of people reporting heart attacks and stroke, but as you know, a lot of that isn't well reported in the general population. It's something slightly different. So we've had to get medical records and then find fellows and other people to review the medical records, which is why we're a bit behind on that. But we are doing our new stroke project, looks at some of the same things that have been looked at in women in the Jackson Heart study. So I think that will be one of the first things we're really working together on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. We are running out of time. I see one question from Dr. DeHode, Dean Antman. I don't know if you'd be able to address this. What is the connection with low vitamin D and the severity of the COVID-19 infection, if any?
Well, you might actually ask that to Dr. Palmer and Dr. Corley. Actually, in the interim, since I heard Dr. Palmer say she was measuring vitamin D levels, I sent her an email saying if they had COVID research, could they look? I think the answer is we don't know, although Dr. Palmer may tell me we do. But hopefully she'll be actually able to answer that question. Julie?
I am really glad to get that question. I don't know the answer, but it's something we'll be able to look at. And so far, what we've been doing with our vitamin D information is using it to build since we only have on 13,000 and it came later, but we've used it to build a vitamin D prediction model which then applies to everyone. And we've been looking at vitamin D levels in relation to first breast cancer and now colorectal cancer, both of which we found that women in the lowest levels have a slightly increased risk of the disease. So we are very interested in vitamin D, and thank you for bringing that up in the terms of COVID-19.
So I don't think Dr. Corley is on the call. I believe he had to go to another meeting. We've got, hold on, I think I see a question from Dr. Edelstein. The best type of Fit D is from sunlight. We are all staying inside. This will make the problem worse. This is true. So any remaining questions? Karen, I know that you have to go to another meeting and I'm sure everyone does, but any remaining top of mind questions? And otherwise we will get to your questions after this meeting.
I do have to get off to start the town hall with the faculty and the staff and the students. But I'd be happy to discuss any of the things that were discussed this morning with any of you by Zoom. We can just schedule it. So send an email that you would be interested, or maybe Suzanne can contact you, try to schedule these kinds of visits if you would like. I think it's a great opportunity. And it's
Absolutely.
to see you all. Stay healthy and stay safe.
And thank you, Dr. Palmer.
Thank you. Take care.
And
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Silver, for
you.
chairing
Yes.
this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Send any questions or requests in my direction, and we'll facilitate answers and meetings.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.